This is one of those stories that if they ever actually try to make a movie out of it, they will intentionally ruin it because the truth seems that unbelievable. Today we're talking about a professional boxer, a professional jazz musician, a World War I machine gunner decorated for valor on the battlefield, a spy, the world's first black combat pilot who also is probably the first man to take a capuchin monkey into combat as well. And just to be clear, this is not like the A-Team Avengers type group that I'm laying out before you. Know, this is all one guy. His name's Eugene Bullard. His friends called him Sparrow. Everybody else just called him the Black Swallow of Death. And for further clarification, Eugene is most well known for being the world's first black combat pilot, but honestly, while that is a great achievement, it's one of the shortest and least interesting parts of his life story, which we're gonna get to right after a word from our sponsor.
Yeah,
Where are you?
I'm shopping.
We're supposed to do the delete me ad.
I don't know what to tell you.
What? This is how we pay the bills so you can go shopping.
Okay, well, I'll get a body double.
What does that even mean?
You'll see.
Delete me!
What is happening right now?
What's up?
Anyways, Delete Me, biggest sponsor of the channel. You guys know the deal by now. You give them money, they make sure the data brokers on the internet are not selling your personal information. These data brokers are legally required to stop selling your information if you ask them to the right way. Unfortunately, each data broker has a different right way. And Delete Me knows all of them. Not only do they go and they get all that information taken down, they continue to monitor all these data brokers in case they get your information again, and then they tell them to quit selling it again. Buh! You can actually do all that yourself. Buh! I mean, yeah, you could. You could also wire your own house and grow your own food, but at some point it becomes more cost and time effective to just let the professionals do their job, and plus, they'll probably do a better job to begin with. I mean, here's the results they got for me. They reviewed over 18,000 listings from over 180 different data brokers and gotten over 3,000 listings removed almost every single month. And to be honest, I have absolutely no idea how long that would have taken me to do it if I decided to do it myself, but I'm 100% sure I would rather just pay Delete Me like $6 a month to do it for me. So if you're like me and you wanted to give Delete Me a try, I'm gonna have a link and a discount code down below. Let's get back to the video. All right, October 9th, 1895, Eugene Bullard is born in Columbus, Georgia. He is the youngest of 7 siblings to William and Josephine Bullard. And as I'm sure you can imagine, growing up as a black child in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Georgia, aka the South, he experienced racism quite a bit at a very young age. His first exposure to this that he remembers was when he was about 5 or 6 years old. He noticed that all of the other white kids that were his friends started to treat him differently because their parents told them to. And to make everything 10 times worse, at the age of 5 or 6, not only does he have to come to grips with the fact that he's losing a bunch of his friends and that he's going to be treated differently in a negative way for the rest of his life for something that's totally outside of his control, but around this same point in time, his mother also passes away at the age of 37. And these two horrific circumstances kind of mingle together in his mind. So not only is it every time he experiences racism, he has to deal with just the racism itself, but he's also constantly reminded of the fact, oh, by the way, your mom died when you were a small child. And the way this manifests to young Eugene is he basically just wants to run away. He wants to get away from racism because A, that would be awesome, and B, it's going to allow him to not have to constantly be reminded of the fact that his mother died. And where he wants to run away to is this place that his grandfather and his dad always told him about, where people weren't racist, a place across the ocean called France. Unfortunately, at this point in time, he's like 6 or 7 years old, and running away across an ocean is an impossible task for him, so he's just gonna have to stay put and deal with it for now. And this all comes to a head about a year later when he's 8 years old. His dad gets into an altercation at work. Now, William Bullard, his dad, is a single father in the South with 7 children. He is working his ass off, doing absolutely everything he can to provide for them. And the best job he's able to get at the time is working as a longshoreman, unloading cargo ships all day long. Now, he was a big guy to begin with. He's 6'3", but after unloading cargo ships for years on end, he is like 250 pounds of pure muscle on top of it. Because of this, he gets the nickname Big Ox. Now, despite the fact that he is a physically intimidating person, he still gets fucked with a lot at work, quite honestly, because they know that they can get away with it. He's a black guy. This is a South. He's not going to do shit because he's got 7 kids at home that are going to starve to death if he's not able to take care of him. So they just talk shit to his face and they treat him horribly. And Big Ox just puts up with it because it's literally all he can do if he wants to take care of his family. And this goes on for months and months. And there's this one dude at work in particular that's always fucking with him. His name's Billy Stevens. And Big Ox just ignores him. Billy Stevens talks shit. Big Ox just turns his back and walks away. And one day, Big Ox does just that. He turns his back and goes to walk away. And Billy Stevens grabs a hay baling hook and smacks him in the side of the head with it, splitting open all the skin on his skull. And Big Ox is now bleeding everywhere. He turns around, grabs him by the neck and the groin, lifts him over his head, and throws this man off a dock into a cargo ship with a massive thud at the bottom, presumably killing him. Big Ox immediately runs to the office of his boss, Mr. Bradley, who actually likes Big Ox and treats him with dignity and respect, explains what happened, and Mr. Bradley tells him, go home, lay low, I'm gonna take care of everything. Now, Stevens didn't die. Bradley drags him in his office and tells him, hey, you're not going to tell anybody about this or you're never going to work in this town again. You deserve that. Shut the fuck up. But unfortunately, a bunch of other racist white guys that were working on the dock saw a black man attack a white man. And that night, they go out to the bar, they start drinking, and they come to the conclusion that they should go do something about it. So that night, while Big Ox is at home with his 7 kids, 2 cars pull up into the driveway, at which point, Big Ox tells his 7 kids, go hide under the bed and in the closet. He grabs a double-barrel shotgun, turns off all the lights, and points it at the door as a bunch of men are banging and screaming on the door and the windows, and he's just sitting there waiting in case they break that door down. He's gonna have to fight whoever comes through it to save his kids. Literally one of the scariest situations a dad can be put in, and while that's going on, 8-year-old Eugene Bullard is hiding underneath a bed, horrified because now he's already lost his mom and he thinks he's gonna lose his dad and he doesn't know what's gonna happen to him when that happens. Luckily, all of the men banging on the door come to the conclusion that nobody's home and they end up leaving. However, this is the breaking point for Eugene. At this point, at 8 years old, he decides, I'm running away from home. So that's what he does. He runs away, but Big Ox tracks him down and drags him back home. So he runs away again. Big Ox tracks him down again and brings him back home. And this goes on as an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old. He's constantly running away from home, and Big Ox is constantly tracking him down and dragging him back home. But then as a 12-year-old, he saves up his money, gets $1.50 to buy a train ticket, runs away from home, hops on a train to Atlanta, and once he hits a big city, Big Ox isn't able to track him down. Not really having a plan on what he'd do if he ever made it this far, he doesn't know what to do next, so he's just looking for food and shelter and anybody that can point him in the general direction of the ocean and how to get on a boat to cross it. And what happens is he runs into a group of gypsies known as the Stanley tribe from Britain, and they end up telling him, hey, we're not from France, we're from Britain, but Britain's a lot like France. There's not as much racism as there is here in the South in America. You can hang out with us. We're going to be going back to Great Britain at some point, and we'll take you with us if you wanted to stay and hang out. So that's what he does. He lives with them for 6 months to a year, and what they were doing in America was they were taking care of horses and doing horse racing, so he learned everything about horses and ends up becoming a professional horse jockey himself. As I'm sure you can imagine, being a black jockey in the South, racism absolutely comes up and is definitely an issue for a young Eugene Bullard, at which point he finally, looks at the Stanley tribe and is like, hey, are we going back to Great Britain or not? I'm sick of all the racism. And they're like, no, we're not going back for a while. So he's like, cool, I'm gonna part ways. I'm gonna figure out a way across that ocean right now. So he separates from the Stanley tribe, ends up working his way up the coast. He heads towards Virginia. So he's like 14 years old, ends up making it to this port in Virginia, and then he's just like kind of wandering around like, what the fuck do I do now? Do I go up and just ask somebody if I can hitch a ride across the ocean? Like, what's my plan here? And then somebody just starts yelling at him like, hey, what are you doing? Pick up those boxes. Help me load this ship. Come over here. And then he's like, cool. So he does it and he just starts working. And that's the story of how he got a job as a longshoreman. And he does that for months. And then eventually he's like, you know what? I'm just going to stow away on a ship. So he goes, hops on a cargo ship, no idea where that ship is going. The ship leaves port. And then like a day and a half later, it pulls into another port. And he's like, I don't think the ocean's that small. So they port again, and he asks somebody on the dock, like, hey, where are we? He's like, you're in Virginia. He's like, well, shit. So he gets off the ship, goes around the port, finds the biggest ship in the port, thinking like, oh, if it's a big ship, it's probably going all the way across the ocean, right? So he stows away on that ship. Like a day into this trip, he gets caught being a stowaway, at which point all these German sailors, some of them speak English, some of them don't. The ones that are speaking English are like, hey, we recognize you from the dock. You were the kid that's loading all the ships. I mean, we can throw you in the brig, we can keep you as a prisoner and drop you off at the first port we hit. We have to drop you off at the first port regardless because you're a stowaway. But if you'd rather, you can just like work for us and we'll pay you and then we'll drop you off when we get there. And he's like, cool, sounds great. Works his ass off. Everybody on the crew ends up loving him. And because they're all German, Eugene actually ends up learning how to speak German. So he works for the entire voyage. They end up in Scotland. They end up paying him $25 in earned wages. They give him clothes, a bunch of supplies, everything they can, because they do like him. And he ends up just walking off the dock into Scotland with basically nothing to make a new life for himself. Now, Scotland at this point in time, definitely different from the South in America. Most of the people there, not really racist at all. However, they'd also never really seen a black person. So everybody just calls him Jack Johnson, who was the world heavyweight champion at the time. That was a black man, probably the most famous black man in the world at this point. And everybody just associates him with Jack Johnson.
It's not because he's black though, right?
What?
Okay.
No, I just don't think so.
Not really knowing what to do, he ends up being a street performer for a little while, and then he goes back to being a longshoreman full-time, earning a decent wage. And you gotta remember, he's like 15, 16 at this point. He's finally going through puberty, and he's being a longshoreman unloading cargo ships all day long. So he just gets absolutely jacked, just like his dad. So he's working Monday through Friday on the docks, and then on the weekends, he's being a street performer. And then one day he sees this one performance where there's like, you know, the big bucket of water and you're sitting on the thing and somebody throws a ball, hits a target, and then dunks the person into the water. And he's like, oh, I'm gonna try that as like the only black guy these people have ever seen. I bet I'll make a ton of money. So he gets a dunk tank set up, calls the thing Dunk the Darky, and the entire time he's sitting on like, you know, the plank or whatever it is that he's sitting on that's gonna drop out when the target gets hit, he's just talking shit to everybody walking by. So he starts making a ton of money. I mean, all the street performances that he did well because he was the only black guy around, and that was a spectacle in that of itself. But now that he's sitting there talking shit to people, the first time these people have ever seen a black man, and he's talking smack to their face, and they get to pay $1 and then dunk him into water, like, he makes a ton of money. And then he ends up turning it into like this Tootsie Pop type situation, you know, like how many licks does it take? He's like, oh, I've been dunked 9 times tonight. You better try for the 10th, and maybe that'll be the one that's enough to wash the black off me, and then I'll look like the rest of you motherfuckers. This thing ends up making him so much money that just working Saturday night, he makes more money than his entire salary as a full-time longshoreman. So now he's like, fuck it, I'm just gonna do this Friday, Saturday night. I'll make more money, and then I have the entire week free to go do something else. So now that he's got all this free time on his hands, he's like, okay, well, what do I want to do now? And he just thinks to himself like, oh, well, I mean, everybody already calls me Jack Johnson and assumes I'm a boxer. I bet I do pretty well as a boxer and make a ton of money doing that if I tried that as well. So he tracks down this boxing gym, goes inside. The boxing trainer has like 0 interest in training him. But Eugene, being Eugene, isn't going to take no for an answer. So despite the fact that the boxing coach isn't going to train him, he's like, I'm just going to hang around the gym and I'm going to work here for free. And that's what he does. And he works there for free for months, just doing everything that needs to be done without being told so. And then eventually the boxing coach is like, fuck, fine. Okay, put some gloves on, come over here. And he starts training Eugene how to box. So that's what he does. He's training full-time to be a boxer Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends, he's making all of his money doing the dunk tank thing. And after about 6 months, he ends up taking his first pro fight at 16 years old. During that fight, he's so fast and borderline untouchable, he ends up earning his first nickname, Sparrow. He crushes it, does great. Now he's making money as a professional boxer, and early on in his career, one of the first cards that he ends up fighting on is being headlined by another Black American boxer known as the Dixie Kid. His real name is Aaron Lister. He is the world welterweight champion, and at this point in time, he is currently living in France after leaving America for the exact same reason that Eugene Bullard did, to get away from racism and segregation. So Aaron Lister, presumably seeing a lot of himself inside the young Eugene, goes up to him after his fight and is like, hey, you should come back to me with Paris and train at my gym. To which Eugene is like, absolutely, Paris, France has been the goal my entire life since I was 8 years old. Let's go. And Eugene Bullard is now moving to France. So he gets to France, he learns French, and it's absolutely everything he ever wanted. He's a professional boxer, he's traveling all over Europe. He also picks up being a jazz musician and a street performer. He's living his dream. He's getting to travel around, do what he wanted, and people don't treat him different because he's black. He actually ends up training with a bunch of other famous black boxers that are living in France for the exact same reason, including Jack Johnson, the world heavyweight champ. Unfortunately, like all dreams, you have to wake up eventually, and Eugene's wake-up call would come in August of 1914 when the Germans would invade France. At this point in time, Eugene is 18 years old, and he absolutely wants to go fight for his new adopted home. So he goes to the military recruiting office, shows up, and they're like, cool, where's your paperwork? And he's like, I literally have nothing. I left home when I was 12 years old in Georgia with nothing but $1.50 in my pocket. I don't have anything. So they basically kick him out and tell him that he can't join. So he starts asking around how he's going to be able to join and help fight and defend France. And he ends up finding out about the French Foreign Legion. If you don't know, the French Foreign Legion is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It is foreigners that fight on behalf of France. All the people that do it have a different reason for doing it. Some of them believe in what France is fighting for and they want to join that fight. Some of them are idealists. Some of them are just looking to get a new start, and they go and they serve in the French Foreign Legion for a couple of years, become a French citizen, and adopt a new identity. So Eugene goes and he talks to the French Foreign Legion. Unfortunately, he's not going to be allowed to sign up for a couple of more months until he turns 19 years old, which is exactly what he does on October 19th. He goes in on his 19th birthday, signs up for the French Foreign Legion, and goes straight into training. Now, the French Foreign Legion is pretty well known and very prestigious, and their training process and their qualification process is known to be extremely tough, and a lot of people don't make it through to become legionnaires. But at the end of the day, this is Eugene Bullard we're talking about, right? He was a professional horse jockey at the age of 12. He's been doing manual labor with grown men since he was 13, and he's been a pro boxer since he was 16 years old. There's nothing that this training is going to throw at him that he hasn't voluntarily done to himself already. So Bullard obviously absolutely crushes it, graduates top of his class, becomes a legionnaire. And because he did so well in training, he gets rewarded by getting to carry the machine gun into battle. Honestly, it's just nice to know that all the other militaries across the planet do the same exact shit. Like, oh wow, you did a great job. Here's your reward. You get to carry the heavy gun. Also, as soon as we get into a firefight, everybody's going to shoot at you first. But Eugene doesn't care. He's ready to go off and fight for his new home, France. He is part of the 3rd Marching Corps of the French Legionnaires, and they receive orders to go to the Western Front near the Somme River in November of 1914. So they take off marching on foot, and they reach the Western Front by early December. And according to legend, one of the first things that Eugene Bullard is told to do is to go and guard one of the flanks during a major German offensive where he needs to hold the line to keep all the other legionnaires from being overrun on the flank. Bullard's manning his machine gun, cutting down wave after wave of German, while the rest of the men in his team run back and forth, getting more and more ammo for Bullard to continue doing this. This went on for so long, and the gun got so hot that it actually boiled off all of the water in its water cooling system, and the gun overheated entirely and was no longer operable. Okay, this is not good. The Germans are still coming. There's no time to run off and get more water, and they can't hold this flank with just bolt-action rifles. They got to do something, and they need to do it fast. So Eugene, thinking quick, does the only thing that comes to mind. He climbs out of the trench, stands up in front of his machine gun, opens up the water coolant tank, and proceeds to piss into it in front of all of the Germans.
And that's what I call high-quality H2O.
And somehow, thankfully, he doesn't get hit. I don't know if that's divine intervention. I don't know if the Germans had also never seen a black guy, so they were just taken off guard by seeing this dude jump out of a trench and piss into a machine gun, you know, like what? Oh my God, the French have Jack Johnson on their side. But I mean, realistically, it's probably just plot armor because he's the main character. Regardless, he successfully defends his flank. Fighting continues for about a week and a half, and then it's Christmas 1914, and Eugene Bullard is there and takes part in the famous Christmas truce of 1914, where soldiers from both sides leave their trenches, meet in no man's land, and celebrate Christmas together. After that, in early 1915, Bullard and the Legionnaires continued to go on and fight in the Battle of Champagne, where Bullard was not defending flanks, he was storming enemy trenches. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this particular type of close quarters combat really favored Bullard with all of his boxing experience. And one of the things that he said was that when he would storm into a trench, these trenches were so full that it was hard to tell after he'd really killed a man because there literally wasn't room for that guy to fall down dead. And Bullard is fighting in this type of environment for months and never once gets seriously injured until his unit is finally pulled out, not because the battle is over, but because his unit has experienced over a 50% casualty rate. Despite that, Bullard is still relatively unharmed. So at this point, Bullard's unit is going to be disbanded, at which point all of the men that are still capable of fighting are going to be given a couple of options. You can A, just be done. You can get out of the war, you've done your part, thanks for your service, fuck off. But you're not going to get your citizenship because you haven't served the full 3 to 5 years in the French Legion, if that's what you want. So option B is that you can get sent over to North Africa where there's significantly less combat, or option C, you can get restationed with the 170th French Infantry and continue to fight in the trenches of Europe. Now, most of the men choose to be sent over to North Africa because trench warfare is absolutely terrifying, but Eugene Bullard isn't here because he wants to defend a bunch of French colonies in North Africa. No, he's here because he wants to defend his new home, Paris, France, and that's exactly what he's going to do. He is one of the few men that volunteers to join the 170th Infantry Regiment of the French Army. So he trades in his Legionnaire's uniform for a French infantry uniform and goes right back into combat. Now, the 170th Infantry Regiment is a famous unit in the French military, and their nickname is the Swallows of Death. And after hearing about Eugene Bullard's performance in the Legionnaires and then continuing to perform at that same level, if not higher, in the 170th Infantry Regiment, it doesn't take long before he is officially given the nickname the Black Swallow of Death. From here, Bullard fights in the Battle of Verdun, one of the deadliest battles in World War II with over 1 million casualties, and unfortunately, Eugene Bullard is one of them. Shortly after Bullard and the men of the 170th took an enemy trench, the Germans would hit it with artillery fire, and a piece of that shrapnel would end up hitting Eugene Bullard in the face, cutting open the side of his face and ripping out most of his teeth on the right side. Despite that, Bullard manages to keep himself in the fight. Now, at this point, most people, at a minimum, would lay low, but not Eugene Bullard. That night, the commander of the 170th needs a volunteer to run through half a mile of machine gun fire and artillery fire to receive important intel and orders from the chain of command and bring it back to him, and Bullard volunteers to lead the group that does it. Bullard, despite his injuries, manages to get this done and is actually put up for the French Croix de Guerre because of it, which is the equivalent of a Bronze Star. The very next day, Bullard is hit with artillery again, fracturing 2 vertebrae in his back and blowing off a chunk of his thigh that required 90 stitches to shut. He's sent back to Paris, where for the next 8 months he is going to have facial reconstruction surgery, he's going to have rehab, and desperately try to regain his ability to walk. While undergoing treatment, he obviously meets a bunch of other soldiers that were also wounded, one of which was a commandant in the French Air Force, and he recommends to Bullard, you know, if you're not going to be able to go back and be a ground-pounding infantryman, maybe you could be a machine gunner in a plane. You don't need to walk and run around for that, and since your leg and walking is no longer your strong suit, you can still shoot machine guns. Why don't you go to aerial gunnery school? I can make it happen. I'm a commandant. So that's what Bullard does. He requests to go into aerial gunnery school, and he is granted that request, considering the fact that he already has a Croix de Guerre and a bunch of other French service medals, and he is going to be going to aerial gunnery school, but he's got a couple of weeks to leave where he can go out and hang out with his friends in Paris before he does that. And one of his friends was this guy by the name of Jeff Dixon. He was this rich dude that lived in Paris, and when they were out drinking one night, he ends up betting Bullard $2,000 that he can't become the world's first black combat pilot, and Bullard accepts the bet. Now, does Bullard have $2,000? No, but he is the main character, and he knows he's going to make it happen either way.
I'll make that deal. How about you, you bitch? You make that deal?
I'd make that deal.
Damn good deal.
So Bullard goes off to aerial gunnery school, and as luck would have it, on his very first day there, he runs into a pilot by the name of John Navarre, one of France's very first ace pilots ever, who's a huge boxing fan and is actually a fan of Eugene Bullard. And he ends up helping Bullard get into the pilot program, getting him through the pilot program, taking him under his wing, and teaching him everything he knows. So Bullard goes, graduates pilot school, becomes the world's first black combat pilot. And just for the record, pilot school at this point in time is absolutely terrifying. You gotta realize fighter planes in World War I are all single-seat aircrafts, okay? There's no, you get to go up in the air with a co-pilot that knows what they're doing and they can talk you through it, and if something goes wrong, they can recover the controls from you. No, it's like, once you go up, it's all you, bro. That's it. Okay, most of us had to learn how to drive with a driver's ed teacher running the brakes and potentially the steering wheel, and that's just going forward, backward, left, and right. He's going forward, backward, left, right, up, down, and there's wind on what amounts to a fucking kite with an engine attached, okay? Absolutely terrifying, but he manages to do it. Now, what do you do when you're in the military and you graduate a tough course or do something impressive? That's right, you get some leave, you go out and you drink with your buddies, and that's exactly what Eugene Bullard does. He goes back into Paris, tracks down Jeff, and is like, hey, I'm the world's first black combat pilot, where's my $2,000? Jeff, man of his word, pays up. And this is my favorite part of the story, because now, according to legend, they go out on the town, they get absolutely hammered, and at some point, Bullard ends up winning a capuchin monkey in a game of dice. So you wake up the next morning, you've got like $1,800 in cash left, you've got a capuchin monkey. What do? Obviously, you pay money to have a custom monkey-sized leather bomber jacket made and a set of goggles and a little headset so that your monkey can go on all your missions with you. Oh, and then you got to name him, obviously. So we named the monkey Jimmy. And then because flying around with a capuchin monkey wearing a bomber jacket and goggles isn't enough style points, we're also going to get a custom paint job on our plane of a heart with a dagger going through it that says all blood runs red across the side. Now, Jimmy and Eugene were only actually on active flight duty for like 90 days, and during that time, he claims to have shot down like 5+ planes, but the problem is how you get a confirmed kill during World War I is actually really difficult. You essentially had to shoot down an enemy plane over your territory so that you could go and actually track down the wreckage. If you shot down an enemy plane and then you shot them down over enemy territory, or if you shot them down over your territory and they managed to limp their plane into enemy territory, they couldn't confirm that that plane was downed, so it never actually counted. So while Eugene did shoot down somewhere between 5 and 7 enemy planes, none of them could officially be confirmed because the wreckage didn't make it onto friendly territory. However, 2 of them were probable, meaning that another friendly pilot witnessed him shoot down and heavily damage the enemy plane before it went into enemy territory. So after 3 months and 25 missions, Eugene goes out to the bar one night and he is wearing his appropriate uniform with all of his medals. And at this point, Eugene has done a lot for the French military and he's been appropriately awarded for it. He has the Croix de Guerre, he has the Wound Medal, their equivalent of the Purple Heart, and he has like, I believe 13 other medals on his chest, more than most soldiers have. Because of that, a racist officer at the bar that night goes up to Eugene and accuses him of basically stolen valor, saying that he's wearing medals that he didn't actually earn, and the altercation escalates until Eugene Bullard ends up knocking him the fuck out. Now, despite the fact that that guy totally deserved it, he is a superior officer and Bullard did in fact strike him, and the sentence for that is 5 years of hard labor. However, considering the circumstances and the fact that Bullard was so well decorated for battle, they decided that they were not going to sentence him to 5 years of hard labor. They were instead going to send him back to the 170th Infantry, where he would then basically be a glorified janitor for the rest of World War I. And to make things even worse, at some point during this period in time, Jimmy, his loyal capuchin monkey, does end up dying from influenza, and the entire military base has a funeral for him. So yeah, Jimmy dies and Eugene ends up spending the rest of World War I scrubbing toilets. Definitely not the happy ending we were hoping for. Luckily, this is nowhere near the end of Eugene's story. So World War I comes to an end. Eugene gets released from service, not really knowing what to do next. He just goes back to pro boxing, goes in there, has his first fight. His legs are still messed up. He can't move as quick or as fast as he used to. Despite that, he goes in there, knocks out his opponent, but he breaks his right hand in the process. And to make things worse, the promoter slips out the back door before he pays Bullard, so Bullard doesn't even get paid for this pro fight where he just broke his hand. So Bullard chases this promoter down the alley, chases him down, knocks him on the ground, roughs him up a little bit, takes this wad of cash out from his jacket, takes exactly the amount that Bullard was supposed to get paid, takes that for himself, and throws the rest of the money at the guy and goes back home. So at this point, Bullard comes to grips with reality. He's not the young man he once was. He's got a messed up leg. He's got a messed up back from the war. On top of that, he just broke his hand. He's not going to be able to be a prize fighter for much longer, if at all. So he decides he's going to retire from pro boxing, and he decides his next thing is going to be teaching boxing. So he takes all of the money that he has saved up from the war, from that bet he won, from winning that prize fight, and he goes and he opens his own boxing gym. Right out of the gate, it's a huge success. He already knows all the pro boxers in town. He's known as a war hero. Like, of course you want to send your kid to go learn how to box from Eugene Bullard, the Black Swallow of Death. Like, the dude couldn't not be successful at this. So the boxing gym is a huge success. He takes the money that he makes from that and reinvests it into a cafe, and that cafe turns into a bar/nightclub. Now, because all the world-class pro boxers in the area want to go and train at Bullard's gym, it only makes sense that they're also going to want to go drink and hang out at his bar and his nightclub. And you want to know who enjoys hanging out with all the world-class boxers? All the rich, famous, wealthy people in the area as well. So now Bullard's nightclub/bar turns into this really high-end establishment. The problem is bars at this point in time have to close early in Paris, but there's a loophole. A bar sells individual drinks. So what Bullard does is he changes it and he no longer sells a pint of beer, a drink of whiskey. He only sells full bottles. He turns it into a bottle club, meaning that he doesn't have to shut down at all. So now not only is he attracting super high-end clientele, they're also going to be spending a ton of money and he doesn't have to shut down early like everybody else. So Bullard's Bottle Club ends up being the place to hang out and party in Paris if you're rich, powerful, and famous. All the high-ranking military officers are going there. Bullard's buddies with all of them. Okay, Louis Armstrong performs there and is personally friends with Eugene Bullard. You know, Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz musician that sings It's a Wonderful World. Josephine Baker performs at his club, who was like the it girl at this point in time, okay? F. Scott Fitzgerald is his personal friend, the guy that wrote The Great Gatsby. Hemingway ends up hanging out there so much that he based a character off of Eugene Bullard. Okay, the fact that most people have no idea who Eugene Bullard is, despite the fact that he's like one of the biggest main characters of all time, is absolutely insane, okay? Not only are all the other main characters from all over the world flocking to his nightclub in Paris to hang out with him, but people that are seemingly nobodies, that are just adjacent to him, somehow, seemingly through divine intervention, go on to also become humongous main characters. Because you want to know who the dishwasher is at Eugene Bullard's Bottle nightclub? It's fucking Langston Hughes, one of the most influential people of the 20th century, is doing dishes in the back at at Bullard's club. So Bullard is like the pinnacle of social society in Paris at this point in time. Like, everybody wants to hang out at his nightclub. He's a war hero. Everybody knows who he is. So during this time, he also ends up falling in love and marrying a woman by the name of Marcel. And Marcel is basically this heiress to this super rich French family. So they end up dating for a while. They end up getting married. Everything's going great. They decide they're going to start having kids. She ends up giving birth to Bullard's son, who unfortunately passes away at 6 months old from pneumonia. This scars Bullard for the rest of his life. Despite that, they do end up trying to have more kids, and in 1924 they're lucky enough to have a daughter, Jacqueline, and then again in 1927 they have another daughter, Lolita. And for the next couple of years after that, he's living the dream. He's getting everything that he hoped that he was fighting for. He's getting to have breakfast and lunch with his daughters every day before he goes off to work to run his nightclub. He has this, wife that they're fortunate enough that she gets to be a stay-at-home mom, and everything's going great. Unfortunately, when Marcel's parents pass away, they end up leaving her a fortune, at which point she gets a little bit tired of her husband always working at this nightclub all the time. She's super rich, and she just expects him to sell the nightclub, live off of their fortune, and they can go to, go to the opera and just have fun for the rest of their life. But that's not who Eugene Bullard is. He wants to work for everything that he has. He wants to punch his own ticket. He wants to make his own way. He doesn't want to live off of another man's fortune, so he refuses to do it. This ends up causing a rift between Bullard and Marcel, and eventually she would end up leaving Bullard and both their daughters. Bullard ends up telling his daughters that the mom actually passed away. I'm not sure why. I'm assuming it's because the mom wanted nothing to do with them, and he thought maybe it would be easier for the daughters to come to grips with the fact that their mom got sick and died, and not their mom just doesn't want them anymore. Regardless, Bullard now finds himself in the very same situation that his father was in, a single dad looking out for his kids in the world. And if that wasn't bad enough, as time goes on and we get further from World War I and closer to World War II, more and more travelers are coming into Paris. You have Americans that are coming back to the place that they had fought in World War I to visit, particularly a lot of white men from the South that think that they can act exactly how they act in, I don't know, Mississippi or Georgia at the time, and they think that they're going to be able to come over to Paris and fuck with anybody that happens to be black, particularly Eugene Bullard. And to be completely honest, it pretty much never works out for them. They all get their ass whooped by Eugene Bullard, and then the cops show up and they are like, oh, wow, now the black guy's going to get arrested because he had the audacity to hit a white man, and that is not the case because the cops show up and they're like, oh, what's up, Eugene Bullard, kingpin of Paris that everybody loves? Is this another racist asshole that tried to beat you up because you're black? Yeah, cool, we'll arrest his ass. And this happens like damn near hundreds of times. In addition to that, there's another demographic of racist people coming into town, the Nazi Party, and he's not putting up with their bullshit either, until he does. And the reason he starts putting up with them is because he realizes he's a perfect spy, and he starts working with the French resistance. You see, his high-profile club attracts high-profile Nazi officers, and they view him as just some dumb black guy. He definitely can't speak French and German and English, so they can just say whatever they want in front of him because he's not going to be able to understand what they're talking about. So he eavesdrops on high-profile Nazi officers all the time and reports it back to the French resistance. And he's so effective at it, they actually end up assigning him like a full-time French resistance spy. Her name is Cleopatra Terrier, or as everybody calls her, Kitty. In addition to working with Kitty, he also starts to get Josephine Baker, the famous woman I mentioned earlier, to start being a spy as well. Now, the problem with that is him catering to Nazis kind of pisses everybody off, and he can't just go out and tell everybody like, hey, I'm actually being a spy and setting them up. So he just kind of has to like let everybody think that he's being friendly with the Nazis when that's not his goal at all. So the general public's kind of pissed off at Eugene, and this all comes to a head when this drunk gangster comes staggering into his club at like 2 p.m. asking where Bullard is. So Eugene comes out from the back, and this gangster immediately shoots him in the stomach. Now, Bullard, having just been shot, immediately collapses. No, I'm just kidding. The man has plot armor. He then proceeds to bum rush the guy, take the gun away from him, and then beat him unconscious and halfway to death with a bottle of booze before collapsing. So his partner Kitty and his employees end up getting him to the hospital, at which point the doctor examines him, basically says the bullet ricocheted around inside your intestines before exiting by your right hip. You're like 99% gonna die. I'd start getting your affairs in order. Sepsis is gonna set in soon. Sorry. To which Bullard basically replied like, nah, I'm good, actually. I'm a very busy guy. I've got kids I got to take care of, employees, running a couple of businesses, being a spy. I'm too busy to die right now. Basically just wills himself to live after the doctor told him he's going to die, makes a full recovery. He's perfectly fine.
Bring your punk ass over here and talk shit. You be spitting out teeth, bitch.
Now, the gang that the shooter was a member of was actually hardcore anti-Nazi, and they were working with a branch of the French resistance, but it was a different branch than what Bullard was working with. So they had basically put a hit out on Bullard to have him killed because they thought he was a hardcore Nazi sympathizer, not realizing that they were on the same team the entire time and the whole thing was just one big miscommunication. So the gang members apologize profusely. They pay him off and beg him not to press charges. They give him a bunch of money, you know, to make up for all the money that he lost by not being able to operate his club the entire time, at which point Bullard is like, I mean, okay, I guess, and that's pretty much it. So Bullard goes right back to doing what he was doing. He's running his businesses, he's being a spy, everything's going fine, and then one day from the French resistance, he gets word that, hey, the Germans they're kind of onto you. They don't know exactly who you are, but they do know that one of our top spies is a black dude that either runs or works in this nightclub, and he's like one of our top guys, which kind of narrows it down to you, so just be aware of that. But it's not really an issue because the Germans haven't invaded France until they do, and as soon as that happens, now it's a humongous fucking issue. So after the Germans invade France, he basically has to board up all his businesses. It's impossible to run a business in France at this point in time. And at this point, he has two options. He either has to A, cut and run, flee to a different country, or B, at the age of 44, he has to go get a gun and fight the Germans. And this is Eugene Bullard. So he goes, tracks down the 170th Infantry Regiment, his own unit, and he's going to go fight with them. He takes a couple of $100, gives the rest of his life savings to his partner Kitty, tells Kitty to watch after his girls until he comes back, and if he dies, get his girls somewhere safe. He loads up a 50-pound backpack with wine, cigarettes, and sardines, which is basically beef jerky, and heads off to the front line to link up with the 170th at the age of 44 years old. Okay, can we just take a minute to appreciate what a fucking gangster Eugene Bullard is? Like, the Germans attack, everybody else is fleeing the country, and his immediate knee-jerk reaction is like, I need a big backpack, I need cigarettes, booze, canned meat, and money for more cigarettes. I'll find a gun along the way. I'm gonna go fight these motherfuckers again, double or nothing, at the age of 44. So that's it. Bullard sets off. He's going to go rejoin the 170th and fight the Nazis. He gets about halfway there, and then suddenly all the people are headed the other direction, including a bunch of wounded soldiers. The 170th has been completely wiped out. So Bullard's like, okay, cool. I'm going to turn around too. I'll head back to Paris, check on my kids. I'll find out where a different army unit is, and then I'll go join them. So he gets back to Paris. Germans already have control of it, and it is under complete lockdown. He can't even get in there to check on his kids. Now, there's still pockets of resistance, so he starts asking around, finds out that there's a big unit right outside of Lyon, so he heads that way, ends up linking up with some of the soldiers there, at which point he's like, okay, I'm just going to join you guys. They're like, you're kind of old. You need to go talk to the major in charge. So they send him that way. He goes to the major, walks in. Sure enough, it's a guy that he fought with at Verdun. This major immediately recognizes Bullard as the complete badass he was from World War I, immediately promotes him to sergeant and gives him control of a machine gun squad. He then sends him out to this smaller village outside of Lyon so that they can defend it. On their way there, they get ambushed by the Germans and they get hit with German 88 artillery fire, and it ends up killing 11 men, wounding 16, including Bullard. One of the shells lands about 10 feet from him. It launched him 40 feet through the air and smacked him into the side of a building, shattering one of the vertebrae in his neck, breaking multiple ribs, messing up his entire side, and obviously giving him a humongous concussion. He gets drug out by one of the medics. He comes to in a hospital, at which point they're like, dude, we're gonna get overrun by Nazis at any minute. You're a black American that's fought against them in World War I and World War II. If they catch you, they're gonna kill you on the spot. You need to get out of here. So he grabs his stuff and just starts limping his way to Biarritz, where the American embassy is, so he can get a passport and hopefully get sent over to America where he's gonna be safe. He walks all through the night, gets about halfway there, and then in the morning, there's this field, and out in this field, there's this soldier sitting up against a tree with a bicycle. So he walks out. It's a French soldier, so he's like, you know, hey, can I have breakfast with you? Can I hang out for a minute? I'm gonna sleep here for a bit. Can you look out for me? The soldier's like, yeah, sure. And he's like, you know, do you have any food or water or anything? I'm starving. I'll trade you my bike, you know, whatever. So he ends up trading him a couple of cans of sardines for this bike, takes a nap, grabs this bike, rides it over to Biarritz, gets to the American embassy. Okay. The embassy lets him cut to the front of the line because he's in a military uniform that's still all bloody and he's clearly wounded. He explains everything that's going on and he's like, I don't have a passport though. I left when I was 12. I ran away. I smuggled myself on a ship to Scotland. I just made my way over to France. So the American embassy is like, shit, okay. And they drag him in the back and they're getting all the information like, where were you born? What's your birth date? There was somebody there that was actually from Columbus, Georgia, and he's kind of quizzing him on the area, making sure that he's not lying. And he knows absolutely everything about Columbus, Georgia, passes the test and they're like, okay, this guy's legit. So they fill out the paperwork for him to be able to get a passport. The problem is you can't actually get the passport there. You can just get the paperwork okaying you to get the passport there. You have to go to a different town 175 miles away to get your picture taken and to have the right person sign off on your new passport.
I'm going to die.
Now, at this point, you would think surely you could, I don't know, maybe hook a guy up and fucking make it work. But no, absolutely not. This is the government. We have to stick to our bureaucratic nonsense. Eugene Bullard hops back on his bike and takes 2.5 days to pedal his ass 175 miles away. He finally gets there 2.5 days later. They're closed because everybody's out at lunch. Typical government nonsense. So he takes a nap and they show back up from lunch, gets his passport, does the paperwork, gets his picture taken. The whole thing takes like 3 hours. Comes back outside. He's going to pedal his ass back 175 miles. Somebody stole his fucking bike. So now he walks 175 miles back. No, I'm just kidding. He actually steals somebody else's bike and rides that back. Okay, look, I'm here for it. There's only one thief in the army. Everybody else is just trying to get their shit back. Them's the rules. So another 2-day bike ride, makes it back to Biarritz, gets to the embassy. They immediately put him on his way back to America. He has to go through Spain, then through Portugal. The entire trip takes like 2.5 weeks. He winds up in New York City and immediately starts doing anything he can to make money and calling up any connection that he can possibly think of, desperately trying to figure out if his daughters are okay, and if they are, how he's going to get them back to America. And this goes on for months, just desperately trying to figure out how to get into contact with his daughters and potentially get them back home to America. And then he actually manages to get in contact with one of his old buddies, a guy that hung out at his club all the time, the ex-ambassador to France on the behalf of America, Mr. Bullitt, and he still works in the United States State Department. So he gets a hold of him, ends up having a meeting, explains the situation. Mr. Bullitt makes one phone call, and the next day, Bullard finds out that his daughters are okay and they are now in American custody and protection, and they are going to be sent back to America to be rejoined with him. Now, the United States government is going to front the money, but Bullard is going to have to pay them back, has no idea how he's going to be able to do it. Veterans groups find out, they raise money, they pay off the entire thing. Bullard gets reunited with his daughters, Jacqueline and Lolita, and they are now living in a 750 square foot apartment in Harlem, while Bullard goes back to being a longshoreman, doing anything he can to make money and raise his daughters. A couple of months go by, everything kind of stabilizes, they're getting used to their new environment, everything's starting to look good, so naturally, Bullard, being Bullard, goes to the recruiting office of every branch of the United States military, volunteering for service because he wants to go back and keep fighting the Nazis. They politely decline. So Bullard just keeps working, keeps raising his daughters. This goes on for years and years, and then eventually his daughters grow up, they get married, they move off and do their own thing, and he is now just in this apartment by himself. After World War II came to an end, he tried to reestablish his rights of ownership to his gym and his nightclub. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. He was at least able to get France to recognize his military service, so France was now paying him a military pension for being a veteran. So Bullard's just kind of working, doing his thing. Then the 1950s roll around, and one of his old buddies hits him up, a guy by the name of Louis Armstrong, one of the most famous jazz musicians of all time, and is like, hey, I'm in New York. I need a backup drummer. My guy's sick. Do you want to come out? I got to do some recordings. So Eugene Bullard is actually on recordings with Louis Armstrong being his drummer in like multiple songs. He's literally like the Black Forrest Gump. Like, he's done so much random, incredible shit, it doesn't even make sense. And by this point in time, Eugene's getting up there in age. He's really starting to feel all of his old war injuries. He can't keep being a longshoreman any longer. He needs to get a job that's a little bit easier on his body. So he ends up getting a job as an elevator operator at Rockefeller Center. The craziest part about this is nobody has any idea who Bullard is in America. They've never really talked about him. He's never really been in the press. He's like a legend over in France, but he's just a humble elevator operator in New York City here in America. And in 1954, the humble elevator operator is requested upon by the French government to fly over to France and to light the eternal flame at the tomb of the unknown French soldier, which he does. And then he just goes right back to operating the elevator in obscurity. And then in 1959, he is called upon by France again, and he is awarded the Médaille Militaire, which is the French equivalent of the Medal of Honor, and he is also made a Knight of France. Those, combined with the Croix de Guerre that he already has, comprise the 3 highest honors that the government of France can bestow upon anyone, and he's got all of them. Now, the entire time he's been an elevator operator, he's always like wearing a couple of medals or two. Nobody really says much about it. They don't recognize what they are. They're French medals. Why would anybody know that? And then he comes back and he's got, you know, the Legion of Honor, the medal that made him a knight, and he wears that to work one day, and There's this guy, his name's Dave Garroway. He's the host of the Today Show, a very, very popular show at the time. And he hops in the elevator with Gene again for probably the 1000th time. And for whatever reason on this day, Dave Garroway recognizes that medal. And he's like, Gene, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's the Legion of Honor. It was just awarded to me recently. And he's like, what? And Gene, just being Gene, is like, yeah, I fought in World War I and World War II. I was the first black combat pilot ever, you know, so I kind of have some medals. At which point Dave Garroway is like, do you want to get interviewed? Like today, like right now? And Bullard's like, I mean, I'm working. I'd have to find somebody to cover my shift. And he's like, I'll make a phone call. Trust me, you're fine. Just come on. You're going to get interviewed on live TV right now. So he goes on live TV for 15 minutes in his elevator operator's uniform. The whole thing goes viral for the 1950s. He ends up going on a bunch of other news shows. They all request that he wear his elevator operator's uniform because it's like kind of the shtick, I guess. But regardless, he gets his 15 minutes of fame and people finally start to know and recognize who he is. All this attention from the public actually inspires him to team up with an author and have his memoirs written and hopefully get them published. Unfortunately, once they were finished, no publisher wanted to publish them because, and I quote, the story's too unbelievable. Luckily, there are several books written about him. Both of them are called All Blood Runs Red, one by Henry Harris and one by Phil Keith. From here, he has one last moment in the sun. The president of France comes to America for a trip and they're making a huge deal out of it. There's a parade when he gets here. They're like, you know, filming him and everybody's watching him go to Saks Fifth Avenue to go shopping. And he's got this speaking engagement at this auditorium with like 5,000 people. And Eugene Bullard shows up to this speaking event. And the president, when he walks in, the crowd's cheering. He locks eyes with Eugene Bullard and he sees him. And the president walks straight up to him and says, "Are you Eugene Bullard?" To which he says, "Yes, Mr. President, I am." And he goes to shake his hand and the president kind of swats his hand away and pulls Eugene in for a bear hug and says, "All of France owes you a great debt," as everybody cheers. And it's the perfect moment. Like, it's the end of Lord of the Rings. It's perfect.
My friends, you bow to no one.
Shortly after this, he is unfortunately diagnosed with a very aggressive form of intestinal cancer that would rapidly bring about the end of his life. 3 days after his 66th birthday, he would pass away. The last person to visit him was the author of his memoirs, Louise Harden. And when she got there, he was unconscious, in bed, laying down, hooked up to a breathing tube. And she's kind of crying quietly, and he must have heard her because the last words that he ever said was he woke up, pulled out his breathing tube, and said, "Don't fret, honey, it's easy." The dude can't even die without being a complete badass about it. At his request, he was buried in a simple plot at the Federation of French War Veterans Cemetery in Queens. His grave is marked by a 1-foot slab of concrete on top of it, bearing his name, his date of birth, and his date of death. Also at his request, he was buried in his uniform, not his flight uniform, not the fancy suit that he wore while he was a spy and a nightclub owner, not with a set of boxing gloves, but in his French Legionnaire's uniform. Which tells me that at the end of the day, despite living one of the most incredible lives in human history, he didn't want to be remembered as the first black combat pilot, or the professional boxer, or the spy and the nightclub owner. He wanted to be remembered as a man that picked up a gun and went off into battle to fight for what he believed in, just like everybody else. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out. Okay, good. Now that I'm not fighting back tears anymore, can we talk about something for a minute? Will you look at this man right here? Okay, the dude has done like 12 different chapters of his life, and all of them are infinitely more badass than anything I will ever do. And he has the audacity to look like a professional male model the entire fucking time he does it. This is outrageous. Okay, I gotta go like hug my kids or something. I feel like I've accomplished nothing with my life after telling that story.